Welcome everyone to Current in 30, the 30-minute webinar series brought to you by the Current Consulting Group. We are thrilled to have you with us. To briefly introduce this series, each session is designed to keep you informed, efficient, and ahead of the curve. On the second and fourth Mondays of each month throughout 2026, we'll break down key things you need to know about workplace drug screening, from emerging trends and regulatory updates to best practices and practical implementation tips. If you missed our previous sessions, please visit our website, currentconsultinggroup.com, or our YouTube channel at Current Consulting Group to view those sessions. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Greta Walsh of the Current Consulting Group, and today's presentation is titled Current in 30, the Next Wave of Synthetic Opioids, Emerging Threats Beyond Fentanyl. This presentation qualifies for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attend today's presentation in its entirety. Today, we're pleased to welcome Jackie Perrone, Vice President of the Current Consulting Group. Jackie leads CCG's comprehensive marketing and brand promotion services for drug testing and background screening providers. She brings 35 years of experience in the diagnostics industry, with the last 30 years focused specifically on drug and alcohol testing. Recently, Jackie served as Senior Director at OraSure Technologies, where for 15 years she led the global direction of the drugs of abuse and risk assessment product lines. Prior to OraSure, she was the Global Marketing Manager for the drug testing division at Roche Diagnostics. Jackie is also a frequent speaker at industry association meetings, end user conferences, and drug and alcohol screening webinars. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to our presenter, Jackie Perrone.
Thank you very much, Greta, and I look forward to spending the next 30 minutes or so with the group here, talking a little bit about some of these new emerging synthetic opioids, and really, looking and focusing on what that means to our world in general, but specifically to employers. So with that, let's get started. So we'll really cover three things in the agenda today. The first is really looking at several emerging synthetic opioids beyond fentanyl. I don't know how many of you might have been on the first webinar, 30-minute webinar that I did back in February, but we talked a lot about fentanyl in that webinar. So if you'd like to refresh yourself or you missed that, as Greta stated, you could go right to our website and you'll be able to find that. We spent a lot of time with that 30-minute webinar talking about fentanyl and the impacts. So today we're going to kind of look beyond fentanyl, including some of the newer synthetic opiates that are out there, nitazenes, carfentanil, morphine, U-47700, and a few others, and really what that means to employers. We're going to explain why many of these substances may not be detected through standard opioid testing panels, and when you should look at what's called an expanded opiate testing panel from either your laboratory or if you're using point of care from your point of care provider. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end, towards the end, about the implications of these emerging synthetic opioids on workplace safety, impairment, recognition, as well as drug testing policy programs that people have. So with that, let's get started. So just as kind of a high level summary, I'm sure many of you know this already, but I thought I would start a little bit with the different categories that are out there. And up until maybe 15 years or so ago, we really focused on what we called natural opiates. So those are the ones that are derived directly from the poppy plant. So morphine, codeine. If you think back to when drug testing was kind of in its infancy back in the 80s and 90s, the standard NIDA-5, or now what we call SAMHSA-5 panel, really was focused on looking for morphine and codeine specifically, and any derivatives thereafter. And so now we have semi-synthetic opioids and synthetic opioids to think about. Both of these are chemically modified versions of natural opiates. When we talk about semi-synthetics, we're talking about things like oxycodone, hydrocodone, oxymorphone, and hydromorphone. And we'll talk a little bit more about where they play as far as more so in the testing realm of things. But what we're really going to focus on today is the synthetic opioids. And these are fully man-made. They're not derived from the poppy plant at all. So we're talking about fentanyl and all of its analogs. And even though I talked about fentanyl back in February, as I mentioned, we'll mention it here because that's really kind of the root of a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, is specifically the analogs. When you think about what we call kind of the modern opioid crisis, we look at it kind of in three waves. We talk about the opioid epidemic, and that really started back in the 1990s, specifically with oxycodone. So we talk about prescription opioids, and primarily that's going to be oxycodone, hydrocodone. We put heroin in here. Now heroin's been around for a long time, but we actually in the 2010s we had somewhat of a resurgence in heroin use and abuse. And that kind of got us through the 2010s. And now what we're seeing in the 2020s, specifically, 2018, 19, and into, we're more than halfway through the 2020s at this point. It's kind of hard to believe. But we're talking about a lot of synthetic opiates. So it's fentanyl and beyond. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, is that beyond piece of it. So synthetic opioids, they are laboratory produced. They bind to opioid receptors and produce effects similar to morphine and heroin. Some of the examples, again, we talked about fentanyl, but carfentanil, nitazines, there's a whole class of nitazines out there. And then specifically, we were going to talk a little bit about something called U47700, and then brorphine and also cyclochlorophene. There's lots of others out there, but these are some of the ones that we're seeing a lot more in the news. And so we'll spend some time talking about those. So when you think about synthetic opioids, so what are some of the main effects? Like opiates, it gives you pain relief, euphoria. So those are kind of the pluses, why people like to use them. On the downside, what you see from them, some of the effects are sedation, respiratory depression, and then also a high overdose risk. So again, we'll spend a little time talking about what that means, against, specifically for employers. Why are they dangerous? Very, very potent, extremely potent. I'll show you in a slide kind of what that means, a couple of slides. They're inexpensive to manufacture. They're very easy to smuggle, and also you can get them on the internet real easy, very easy to, with the surgence of online ordering, you can pretty much get anything online, including a lot of these synthetic opioids. And this is probably one of the most dangerous things we'll talk about today. Every single one of the opioids that I'm going to be talking about is often mixed into counterfeit pills or other drugs. And this is where, we think about some of these things a lot of time as quote unquote street drugs. And while they certainly are, the fact that they're being mixed into counterfeit pills and other drugs, which people think, hey, I'm getting a prescription drug, I'm getting my Xanax, or, whatever it is that they're getting, they're being mixed in with these drugs. And so people are accidentally ingesting a lot of these synthetic opioids without realizing it. So when we think about why this is important from an employment perspective, because a lot of people are using, these medications and pills and not realizing what they may be cut with or mixed with. Why do they keep appearing? Part of the reason is just market adaptation. And we see this with a lot of things. We've seen it with a lot of the THC synthetics. When the government regulates one substance, illicit manufacturers find a way to create slightly different analogs. So while we're talking about opioids here, the same could be said for THC and all the deltas, you know, the delta 8s and the 10s and the things that we're seeing out there. We saw it with bath salts. So rapid chemical modification, these things, again, these are made in labs, very easy to tweak it a little bit, change a little bit, and then really, you know, you're changing it enough that it's not being able to be detected. It's not in the law, so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons that we keep seeing them up here. Also, from a profit perspective, these are highly potent drugs. They require tiny amounts to produce many doses, small shipping volumes. So again, you've got the internet, you've got other things. It's not like you have to produce huge batches here. You're only requiring a little bit goes a long way, as they say, unfortunately. New analogs may temporarily avoid regulation. Again, thinking back, again, not only just opiates, but thinking back to THC and some of the deltas, you know, for how long had Delta 8 kind of avoided regulation? And, you know, it takes a while to catch up. So it's kind of the same thing that you see here with the opioids and increased potencies. So traffickers may mix drugs to produce stronger effects. Unfortunately, they want to see you coming back. So they try different things. You know, we're going to talk about nitazene specifically in a couple of slides, but the DEA reports that 22 different nitazene compounds have appeared since 2020. So in a short period of 5 to 6 years, we've got 22 different compounds that are out there. Really, again, kind of goes towards why we're talking about these things today and why they've infiltrated our society as they have. So again, fentanyl, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but I think it's really important to ground us as we start talking about some of the other opioids that are out there, synthetic opioids, to really talk about fentanyl. I think we all know a lot about fentanyl, but just as kind of some background, potent synthetic opioid originally developed for legitimate medical use, first synthesized back in 1959 and really introduced in the 1960s, primarily as an IV anesthetic, really designed to provide fast-acting pain relief. Clearly in medical settings, it has been such a blessing for so many people that need it. It is approved by the FDA as a powerful analgesic, painkiller, as well as an anesthetic, often used for severe pain management, such as in cancer patients or during surgery. The effect of what we're seeing, though, is while it helps a great deal of patients that it needs to, it's also being used incorrectly and illicitly. And that's the side of things that we're going to be talking about. It's approximately 100 times more potent than morphine and 50 times more potent than heroin as an analgesic. So that's, you know, a blessing and a curse in a way for those people that need it from a pain perspective. It is such a godsend for them, but at the same time, when misused as we're seeing it, it can really have very bad impact. A very small dose can deliver a significant pain relief or a life-threatening overdose. Because of that, it is classified as a Schedule II controlled substance in the United States. Just something to note that nearly 70% of all drug poisonings and overdose deaths in 2023 actually involve synthetic opioids and primarily fentanyl. So we are absolutely seeing, from an overdose perspective, we are seeing impacts from that. Why, from an employment perspective, could this be important? Well, because an individual under the influence of fentanyl can also experience significant performance deficits. And these include things like confusion, altered mental status, and drowsiness. So imagine, you know, being in an environment where people are relying on you to run machinery, to operate vehicles, so on and so forth. And you may have things like confusion and drowsiness happening. Very, very impactful from a workplace perspective. So let's move on. We're going to talk now about some of the actual analogs themselves. So carfentanil is the first one we're going to talk about. This is a synthetic opioid originally developed for large animal sedation. And when I say large animals, I mean things like animals like elephants, huge, big, animals. And part of that reason is because it takes a very little, it's a very, very powerful analog. In fact, a lot of people consider carfentanil one of the deadliest fentanyl analogs that's out there currently. It is not approved for human use for that reason alone. Because of its strength, it takes just a microscopic amount of carfentanil to give you a powerful and often deadly impact in humans. So it's 100 times stronger than fentanyl, 10,000 times stronger than morphine, and microgram level doses can absolutely be lethal. And when I say that, take a look at the diagram kind of to the right of the slide. Fentanyl, a lethal dose is 2 milligrams, and you see what that looks like on the pinpoint of a pencil. Now look at carfentanil, a lethal dose, 0.02 milligrams, tiny, tiny amounts. So it takes just a very small dose to be lethal. The problem that we're seeing is it's being mixed with other drugs, pressed into pills that look like prescription painkillers. And sadly, the majority of seizures in 2024 were either in pill or tablet form, not powder. So while we see that carfentanil can come in powders, what we're typically seeing in seizures and out there is pill and tablet form. And again, as I mentioned before, that creates havoc because when it's mixed in, you do not know what you're getting. You think you're taking, a very innocent pill to help your back pain or your leg pain or whatever it is. And what you're not realizing is it's mixed with other things like a carfentanil. Nitazines. Talked a little bit about nitazines. So nitazines are fast-growing concern. They represent one of the most significant emerging opioid threats because they're appearing more and more frequently and becoming more and more potent. As I mentioned before, 22 nitazines have been discovered just in the last 5 to 6 years. So what are they? So they're synthetic opioids that were first developed in the 1950s, never approved for medical use. So no medical use at all, not in animals, not in humans, not at all. 4 examples here, and what you see actually off in the graphic to the side is the potency. So heroin, let's just take it a baseline of 1. Fentanyl about 50 times stronger. And then some of these other examples, some of the other analogs, 50 times, 100 times, 250 times, 500 times more potent than what we see heroin. So that's where we're coming up against some of the issues. Not only are they found in counterfeit pills, but we're also finding them in heroin and cocaine. As I mentioned, often undetected by users. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on in the presentation, but it's difficult for toxicology labs to identify because these analogs keep coming and they're new. When you think about that, you get a drug that's out there. There's a lot of work that a toxicology lab has to do. They have to identify it, first of all. Then they have to look at how do we create a test for it, so on and so forth. So you've got 22 new ones and more on the way. It is really difficult for labs to identify. And we're seeing rising overdose deaths throughout the United States. Now, this next slide will give you an idea of where detection has gone in the United States. So you can see the darker colors here, the maroon and orange colors, are where we see a high presence as well as a moderate presence. So we see it a little bit in the East Coast, but really more east, to Midwest area is where we're seeing it. But with the exception of one state, Wyoming, we're seeing it across the United States. So, you know, as happens with lots of different things, it kind of starts in one geographical area, spreads, and that's kind of what we've seen here in the Midwest area, but we're seeing it spread throughout the United States. So again, this is, you know, when we think about how pervasive some of these analogs have gotten, clearly these nitazines are being seen all throughout the United States at this point. Next one that we're going to talk about a little bit is called U47700. So this one doesn't have a fun name. It has a number. And it does have a couple of street names. So primarily this is identified as pink, but it's also on the street. You can refer to it as Pinky and U4. So I guess U4 coming from it's probably two things in the way you think about it. It's a short version of U47700, but U4 could also be euphoria. One of the scary things is it is being used in combination with other illicit opioids. And they also have street names. So one of them is Gray Death. So that's a mix of heroin, fentanyl, and carfentanil, in addition to the U4 that's out there. And there's another one called Red Bull. So this is a mix of furanol fentanyl, valeryl fentanyl, which are two other analogs, as well as U4. And there's a host of others. I just picked two, but it's something if you just go out on the web and search, you'll find a number of them, and they all have kind of crazy names that are out there. One is actually Dr. Dre, Dr. Dre Beats. It's kind of scary. But in any case, there's lots of different nicknames for it, if you will. So this is a synthetic opioid that is developed, again, in research labs as an alternative to morphine. This was in the late 1970s. This is not approved for medical use, and it is classified as a Schedule I controlled substance. This one, U4, is about 7.5 times more potent than morphine, and it's associated with clusters of fatal overdoses. In looking at kind of where it is in the United States, it's again a lot in the Midwest. It's seen in other states as well. But Ohio specifically has one of the highest overdose rates in the United States. This one can be treated with Narcan, naloxone, or Narcan. We'll talk a little bit more. Many of these synthetic opioids, that is kind of the treatment of choice, is Narcan. Some of them, though, are so potent that Narcan, you need multiple doses of Narcan, or Narcan may not completely do what it needs to do. So again, Narcan, you know, we'll talk about naloxone and what employers can do. But you know, just to kind of give you an idea. So often sold online in baggies as a powder or prescription pills. So morphine, this one appeared in 2019, 2020. It's a potent synthetic opioid with characteristics similar to morphine and fentanyl. It's got greater potency than both of them, slightly lower than fentanyl. One of the things with this one is it is a Schedule I drug. It's a controlled substance. There's no accepted medical use. It's identified in many forms, including powder, crystal, tablet, capsules. It's nicknamed purple heroin. And that's important because purple heroin isn't actually heroin. It's a mix of lots of other drugs. Linked to a number of overdose outbreaks. In one incident, I found a 43-year-old man died from a combination of morphine and another synthetic opioid. Before his death, he reported he had consumed what he thought was a 30 milligram Percocet tablet. So that's where, you know, we see again the whole problem that we have, you know, out there. In 2024, several morphine analogs emerged, and we're seeing some of these morphines. Chlorphene is one of them. And it's a newly emerging synthetic opioid, first detected in 2024. It's about 10 times more potent than fentanyl. It can cause sudden respiratory failure. And this is one where multiple doses of Narcan may be required, increasingly seen throughout the United States. Lastly, I'm going to talk real quick about a couple of non-opioid additives that are complicating things a little bit. So xylazine or tranq and medetomidine. These are non-opioids, but they're being mixed with other opioids. So we're seeing them kind of infiltrate. Really important to know that there are other things out there that are kind of mixing in with some of these synthetic opioids. Also very potent, and we're seeing dramatic increases in the last couple of years. And just real quick, I want to talk about kratom. So kratom, not an opioid, but acts like an opioid. It interacts with the opioid receptors in the brain and produces opioid-like effects. Lower doses can give you increased energy, alertness, sociability. Higher doses can cause sedation, drowsiness, slowed reaction time, dizziness, impaired judgment. All things, again, that you would not want to have happen while you are working. So it does occupy kind of a unique position in discussions about opioids. So something, again, to be thinking of as you're looking at certain drugs and so on and so forth. So with that, we are going to talk really quickly, just a couple of slides on expanded opiate testing, why it matters from a testing perspective. So testing panels and detection. So a 5-panel test, DOT test, and we'll talk about DOT. In general, 5-panel test, whether it's a DOT or not, covers the same screening class. It covers marijuana, cocaine, amphetamines, opioids, which includes certain semi-synthetics, and we talked a little bit about that before, as well as PCP. So back in 2018, the Department of Transportation, as well as HHS, wanted to address the rise in prescription opioid misuse, so they started including semi-synthetics like oxycodone, hydrocodone, hydromorphone, and oxymorphone. But right now, fentanyl is also being discussed as far as from a DOT perspective. So synthetic opioids like fentanyl, while not in the panel, I think will probably move into the panel very soon. I know it's in discussion. Synthetic opioids like those and the ones that we just talked about require specific lab methods. They also have lower cutoffs than standard opiate tests. So employers need to really confirm with their lab exactly which analytes are included, as many opioid panels can vary. So to be clear, a standard 5-panel DOT test will test for things like heroin and morphine, but also hydrocodone, oxycodone, hydromorphone, and oxymorphone, but not some of the others. You have to be very clear with your lab. They can test for them, but they are not part of a standard 5-panel DOT test. You need something that's called an expanded opiate panel. And that's really important because, you know, as we just saw, the opiate crisis is not static. Newer drugs appear constantly. Standard panels may not cut it anymore. So, you know, as an organization, you need to make sure that you are looking at, you know, upgrading to fentanyl and synthetic opiate detection panels. Because if not, basically, you know, you are in a blind spot. You may not be picking up, you may not be detected. You might think that you are, but you're not. So really important to take a look at what you're testing for. So what are some of the implications? Things employers should know. You know, again, if you're thinking about opioid misuse as primarily involving prescription painkillers or heroin, as we've said, today's environment is different. Employees may be exposed to counterfeit pills that include fentanyl, and other synthetics. Overdose risk can infect workers with no history of opioid use disorder. They're highly potent. And if you take a look at the chart, one of the things we've done, looking at industries with higher injury rates, construction, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, may face elevated risks. So if you're in any of these, categories, really thinking about, you might have employees that have injuries, repetitive strain injuries, safety sensitive positions, things like that. They may be in a position that they're using some of these prescription drugs that who knows what's being cut, where they're getting them. So it is a very important topic to think about. From a safety perspective, employee health and safety, workplace stability, liability and compliance, really important, just like any drug, whether it's marijuana, cocaine, so on and so forth. We need to be thinking about these things all the same. It's increasing the risk and impairment that we see on a daily basis. What employers need to understand. Again, when employees are obtaining what they think is oxycodone, Xanax, Adderall, Percocet, the pills may contain some of these additives. And I say additives in a bad way. Adulterants, some people think of them as adulterants. So it's not solely a substance misuse issue. It can also be an accidental poisoning issue. And that's how we have to start thinking about things. Naloxone in the workplace becoming much more commonplace. Just as workplace maintain AEDs for cardiac emergencies, some employers are starting to think about naloxone as an important emergency preparedness tool. They now stock naloxone kits. They train their staff on how to use it. They include overdose response in their emergency action plans and have a coordination and a plan with their local EMS. Doing that really can benefit if they need to have a rapid overdose reversal, improves their emergency preparedness, and could be potentially life-saving. Some of these drugs are so potent, they act so quickly, before you realize what's happening, it may be too late. So what can employers do? Educate, prevent, emergency preparedness, data monitoring. You can read everything here on the slide, but employee awareness educations are really important. Make sure that people have information on counterfeit pills, know what's going on out there. Prevention, EAP programs, access to treatment, non-punitive reporting mechanisms. Emergency preparedness, we talked about naloxone availability, first aid training, emergency response protocols, and looking at some of your injury trends, near miss reporting, also occupational health indicators. Educate, what's going on out there. So many of the folks that are out there, about 50% of people that are using some of these synthetic opioids are employed either full or part-time. So they are in our workforce. How can you recognize a possible opioid overdose? Some of the warning signs: unresponsive, difficulty waking the person, slow, shallow, or stopping breathing, their pupils are pinpointed, blue or gray lips, choking sounds, limp body. Emergency response: make sure that, call 911, administer naloxone if available, make sure you monitor their breathing, stay with the person until EMS arrives. Possible impairment, some of the signs you might observe, as I mentioned before: confusion, slowed reaction time, difficulty concentrating, unsteady movement, excessive drowsiness, unusual behavior changes. Now, important to note that these are signs not specific to opioids. They can also indicate other, fatigue, illness, other medication side effects, heat stress, medical emergencies, or other drugs somebody might be using. But important to note, if you see these things occurring, it could certainly be a red flag. They do present, these synthetic opioids present unique challenges. Important to really, the effects may occur rapidly. The potency, as you saw before, can vary significantly. Employers may not know what has been consumed. And again, because counterfeit medications may contain unexpected opioids, it's really important to, again, be aware of the signs and symptoms. Recommended training, signs and symptoms training is really important. So we recommend that the training, that you do have some trainings and you include supervisors, safety managers, security personnel, health staff, first aid teams, human resource leaders. Policy considerations. We're going to spend just a minute talking about policy. So recommended policy elements, make sure you've got a broad substance definition. It's not just, again, about the standard 5 drugs out there. Broaden that substance definition. Fitness for duty standards. Think about reasonable suspicion procedures. What is your emergency overdose response? How do you put that in your policy? Naloxone program. If you're going to do that, put language in your policy about what that looks like. Drug testing language. We talked about EAPs already. Make sure you've got EAP provisions in there. Prescription medication disclosure. That may be something you want to think about putting in there. Training requirements and periodic review. Periodic review is really important because, again, we're seeing so many of these new analogs appearing. They're coming faster and faster. So the policy that you had 2 years ago may be a completely different policy that you need now. Just real quick, as I'm wrapping up, I think most people know CCG offers a lot of different services. One of those is reviewing or updating your policy. Certainly reach out if you have questions about how to do that. We do offer in many cases just a free 30-minute look at your policy, 10-point look where we can take a look and see, does it need to be reviewed, and then we can kind of go from there. And then lastly, some of the compliance services. We do offer training. So we talked a little bit about signs and symptoms. We do have signs and symptoms training. We've also got a state law database, which is great as laws change to make sure that you're in compliance, so on and so forth. So with that, we are actually a little bit over, and I apologize for that, but a lot of good information that we need, and hopefully you got some use out of it. These slides obviously will be available for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to email. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Greta.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you to everyone joining us for today's edition of Current in 30. We hope these insights help you stay informed and confident in your workplace drug screening decisions. As a reminder, this presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions in a few days informing you how to access the recording via email. Additionally, this presentation qualified for half of a professional development credit from SHRM and HRCI for those who attended today's presentation in its entirety. If you have met that requirement, you will be emailed the activity IDs. Remember, we'll be back every second and fourth Mondays of 2026 with things you need to know to stay current in this industry. Be sure to follow the Current Consulting Group and check your inbox for upcoming session details. Until next time, stay current and have a great day.